140-year-old renovated bridge collapsed in under 15 seconds, killing 135 people. Can you imagine what parents who watched their children vanish underwater must have felt? According to the survivors, there were 3 violent snaps before everything fell apart. Within hours, officials and the company behind the bridge pushed one narrative. The crowd overloaded it, people were shaking it, and it was the visitors' fault. But we looked into contracts, renovation plans, and court affidavits, and this was no accident. So let's dive into what happened that day. On Sunday, the 30th of October 2022, nearing the Diwali holidays, Morbi was in full festival mode. That evening, hundreds of families and tourists visited Jultopol Bridge to watch the lights over Machchhu and enjoy the breeze from the middle of the bridge. In Morbi, Jultopol was never just steel and planks. It was the postcard of the town, a slender suspension bridge over the Machchhu, used for school trips, family walks, and festival evenings. For many locals, walking to its center had become a bit of a tradition. Built in the late 19th century as a prestige project, it was about 230 meters long, that's roughly 2 football fields, and just 1.25 meters wide, narrow enough that you'd have to walk single file. Our team dug into early records and found that only a small number of people were allowed at a time, roughly 15. It was meant to carry light, careful footsteps, not crushed under packed crowds. Over time, that delicate royal footbridge was treated less like heritage and more like a cheap crowd magnet. It was always crowded, mostly because the tickets were so cheap. During festivals like Diwali and New Year's, the management pushed prices up slightly to make more money. The difference was tiny, so the crowds just never stopped coming. In fact, it only meant more profit once the numbers added up. What had started as a royal landmark slowly turned into a money-making machine. You see, while the money rolled in, the upkeep didn't keep pace. The bridge kept taking more weight than it was ever designed to handle, and still, no one checked on it and fixed what was quietly falling apart underneath. And over the years, floods weakened its foundations, and monsoon rains kept eating away at its metal. Each season left a little more rust on the cables and loosened another joint, but the bridge stayed open anyway. The authorities knew it was old, they knew it needed care, but fixing it cost money, and keeping it open made money. When we began looking into this case, the very first thing that shocked us was that even the contract keeping it open had already expired. Still, the bridge never showed signs of serious damage, so people never suspected any danger. As a result, it stayed open for business even with expired contracts. After about 5 years of that, Arriva finally decided to take some action. In December 2021, the company wrote to the city that even after temporary repairs, the bridge's condition was critical, and that an accident could happen at any time. But in the same letter, they also asked for a long-term deal and higher ticket prices. The bridge might have been close to breaking, but the focus was still on keeping the profits strong. Just 3 months later, in March 2022, Arriva got what it wanted, a 15-year contract to repair, maintain, and operate the bridge. So they closed the bridge for repairs around March 7, 2022. The agreement said that the work would take 8 to 10 months. In reality, they reopened barely 7 months later on October 26. They rushed the work to reopen just in time for Diwali week, when the crowds were the biggest and ticket sales were at their peak. It made us wonder, how could they fix a 140-year-old bridge properly in just 7 months? So our team dug deeper and uncovered some major red flags, almost as red as my hair. Most of the fixes were on the surface level. The old wooden planks were swapped for a continuous aluminum deck, shiny and smooth, meant to look stronger. Workers even added fresh paint and brighter lights to give it a polished finish. All of this work was handed over to a small subcontractor with no proven bridge expertise, while Arriva focused on the big opening celebration. Out of the $240,000 budget meant for renovations, they ended up using only around $14,000 of it, most of which went into making the bridge look new rather than making it look safe. The rest going into their pockets, of course. They even claimed the new official capacity to be around 125 people at once, far beyond the 15 that it was ever designed to hold. Hang on to that detail, it's gonna matter a lot soon. On the day it reopened, they had ticket counters at both ends and just 2 untrained guards. They sold over 3,000 tickets without enforcing limits to how many people can even be on the bridge. That setup, combined with no independent certification, was a recipe for trouble. These tiny acts of negligence set up a deadly trap. Now all it needed was a crowd, and there was plenty of it. We've looked into reports, and nearly 300 people were on the bridge near the time of the collapse, far more than the original design intent and beyond what the altered structure could safely carry. Some groups moved together, some tested the sway, the kind of behavior you see on almost every hanging bridge that is sold as an experience. Around 6:40 p.m., a loud crack cut through the noise. One of the main suspension cables, already weakened, gave way. The deck broke at the center. Panels, rails, and people dropped into the Machchhu River in seconds. Those near the towers clung to the twisted metal. Those at the center went straight down. In that part of the river, the water was roughly 15 to 20 feet deep, and it tugged at anyone who went in. On the broken bridge, some survivors held twisted railings or loose cable and tried to keep their heads up long enough to be saved. Before the official help could reach, though, local superheroes rushed to the rescue. Nearby residents ran toward the noise, fishermen jumped out of their boats, and even a group of carpenters who lived close by heard the shouting and jumped into the river without any second thought. They managed to pull out around 30 people. Then the big response kicked in. National Disaster Response Force (NDRF) teams reached with boats and divers. The Army and Navy joined them, and the Air Force helped from above. They set ropes across the current and worked area by area so nothing was missed. It was slow work, but each pass brought more people to the side. Hospitals across Morbi stayed open through the night, trying to save the injured. Ambulances kept arriving. Many of the patients were children. Down at the river, searchlights swept the water well past midnight. By the time the operations ended, over 140 people were confirmed dead, and many more injured. Despite such loss of innocent lives, the blame still moves straight onto the people who had been standing onto the bridge. Investigators told reporters the incident showed lack of crowd regulation and management, and early coverage framed it as an issue of people rushing and pushing during holiday weekend. A spokesperson linked to Areva claimed the bridge went down because too many people in the midsection were trying to sway it, as if the main problem was visitors treating it like a toy. That story landed fast because, well, it sounded simple. But what made no sense to us was how a bridge that survived decades suddenly collapsed right after it was renovated. I mean, it sounds a bit ironic if you ask me. So we looked deeper into the entire case and found something really disturbing. Areva had reopened the bridge without any formal testing. You want to guess how the management tested it? By taking a casual stroll along the bridge. The contract had required those checks before letting the public back on, yet the gates still opened in time for Diwali week. People were unknowingly the real load-bearing test subjects. The company in charge, Areva, made its name selling electronics, home appliances, and e-bikes, not suspension bridges or structural engineering. Their existence on paper did not match the task they signed up for. When we looked at the contracts and peeled back the steel, we found that the very upgrades meant to fix the bridge instead accelerated its doom. It all started with the new deck. Remember how Areva replaced the old wooden planks with a solid aluminum sheet? Well, it did look modern and tough, but that deck was heavier and far more rigid than the previous one. It didn't bend or flex like the old one, so every step, every sway, pushed extra force into the cables instead of being absorbed by the deck itself. Over time, those extra shocks traveled straight into the bridge's weakest parts. That's when the cables began to give out. In one of the 2 main suspension cables, 22 of the 49 cables were already corroded or snapped long before the night of the collapse. The metal was rusted, the bolts had loosened, and some anchor pins were barely holding. The bridge was being eaten from the inside, but no one saw it because the paint on the outside looked new. Then came the suspenders, the vertical rods that held the deck. Instead of replacing them properly, workers welded new pieces into old ones. Those welds changed how the weight moved through the structure, creating weak spots where there shouldn't have even been tension. It was like patching a broken chain with glue and calling it good as new. When all the work was done, no one actually tested if the bridge could hold the people that it was about to welcome. Normally, a bridge like this goes through a few basic safety steps before reopening. Based on the research that we have done, engineers had to first run a load test, where they would place controlled weights like sandbags or water drums on different sections to see how the structure behaves. They measure how much it bends, how the cables stretch, and whether it settles back to normal afterward. Next comes a structural audit, which means opening up joints, checking welds, and inspecting cables for corrosion or cracks that fresh paint can easily hide. Once those steps are complete, an independent expert issues a fitness certificate, confirming that the bridge is safe for public use. It's a legal must, not an optional formality. But for this bridge, none of this was done. The Morbi municipality's affidavit later confirmed that there was no record of a load test, no independent clearance, and no approval from the general board. Arriva simply finished aesthetic repairs and reopened the bridge on its own word. So if the bridge was never tested, that brings up the question: how exactly did they decide that it could hold 125 people? That number wasn't the result of any load test or engineering proof. Instead, it came straight from Arriva. They simply declared the bridge safe for that many people. In reality, no one was counting. Ticket clerks at both ends were busy selling passes, not tracking how many people were already on the deck. Under those conditions, it is crystal clear that the collapse was not a freak event. It was where everything was already heading. During sentencing, High Court started with the basic questions. Why was a public bridge handed to Arriva on a thin 15-year deal with no open bidding? And why was it reopened without a proper safety certificate or a full approval from the city's own board? Because those questions had no good answers, the state stepped in. In April 2023, the government dissolved Morbi municipality and installed an administrator, which was a quiet admission that the local system had failed. Afterward, police filed criminal cases against Arriva's managing director, company officials, contractors, ticket clerks, and guards under serious sections for causing deaths through their actions and negligence. However, by 2024, the Supreme Court had granted bail to Arriva MD Jaysukh Patel. With that, almost all the main accused were out on bail, while the families were still waiting for a final trial. And in October 2025, the Gujarat High Court again delayed framing charges, still hearing arguments on how strong those charges should be and where the case should be heard. The bridge fell in seconds, but accountability, it seems, needs years to catch up with the ones who did this. In the next video, another safe landmark fails the same way, and a packed crowd pays the price yet again.